Hi everybody, hope you're keeping safe and well, and welcome to my next video. In this one I am going to return to something I looked at briefly in a previous video, and that's this, the Spectra Plus 128 add-on for the ZX Spectrum. And I'm also going to look at the sister unit to it, the Chroma 81 for the ZX81. In the previous video I was talking very much about the SCART connector on the Spectra Plus. This provides an RGB SCART output that I can use with my OSSC, but I also said there were many other features of this expansion, and that's what I'm going to walk through today along with the Chroma 81. So let's take a look around. We'll come back to the Chroma 81 later on. Let's just look at the Spectra Plus 128 to begin with. And let's start with the different features of this, but particularly at this end. So we've got the traditional PCB connector that we get on Spectrums at this end. This enables us to connect to any ZX Spectrum, but for the later models you do need a little adapter here to move some of the signals around the different pins just for compatibility. Otherwise this does work with every Spectrum. As I said before, we looked at the SCART output before, but what else has this expansion got to it? Well, we've got this flap here which adds a ROM socket that enables us to have compatibility with the original interface 2 for the Spectrum. More on that in a minute and what goes in here. Just continuing round, we've got a back port here for further expansion out the back. This replicates pretty much all the signals at the front here, with just a couple of minor exceptions, which I think from memory are to do with the fact that you've got to look after the ROM switching more carefully for expansions out at this end, sort of behind the Spectra. We've got our white button here, which is a non-maskable interrupt button, and we'll see that in operation later on. And then a couple of 9-pin D connectors. So here we've got a serial output, and this matches the serial output on the original interface 1 from Sinclair, and therefore gives compatibility with that. This one, on the other hand, obviously that's a female and this one's a male one. This is a joystick socket, which is a Kempston compatible joystick. And then finally, to round it all off, we've got some switches here, configuration switches, which effectively turn on and off these different expansion capabilities, and one or two other things. Again, more on that later. I think the other thing to say before we go into any detail on this is this is all housed in a rather beautiful case here, which has been 3D printed. I must confess, 3D printing seems to have moved on a lot since I last had something that was 3D printed, and I just love the way this has been designed to really fit the PCB inside here and all the components, just the way the sort of joystick socket here is recessed, and likewise the configuration switches there. I just think this is beautifully done. Amazing what can be done now with 3D printing. So I must confess, whenever I get a new bit of kit, I have this irresistible temptation to open it up and see what's inside, and that's what I did with this expansion too. What you can see here is a carefully set out PCB with surface mount technology, a central CPLD chip that does all the brains, and then some support chips around the edge, the SCART connector, etc, etc. You know, what do we tell from all of this? Well, it's been carefully put together and thought about. I think the other thing I would just draw out is the power regulation, which is bottom left here, which is, as far as I'm aware, meaning that all the power for this expansion is coming from the 12 volt output on the Spectrum, which is one that is not usually used by anything else. So it's sort of free access to power which then it regulates down to the voltages that the expansion needs. So why am I mentioning that? What it means is there's no extra load on the 5 volt power line, which is where almost all the chips in the Spectrum and expansions get their power. So you know, potentially, at any rate, you know, I'm not an electrical engineer, but potentially it seems to me that that means it puts less strain on the overall system, and I think it's quite a thoughtful design aspect. So we've looked all the way around the Spectra Plus and we've had a quick look inside, but what you might be thinking is that this is a slightly strange collection of different expansion possibilities. Why put all these together? Isn't this just a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of different parts? But actually, once you start thinking about it, it's a really clever design. So the joystick socket here allows us to play games more easily without a separate joystick port. I guess if I had one comment on this, it would be nice to be able to configure this so it's not just Kempston joystick, but maybe a cursor joystick as well. I guess that would mean more switches down here, but it's a small point. But why the serial port? And it all comes back to this slot here for the ROM to go in. So let's look at the ROM, and the latest version of the ROM from the same manufacturer, who is, by the way, Paul Farrow of fruitcake.plus.com, is this, the ZX C4, and as you might guess, there are 3 previous versions of this, but this is the latest one. This has, believe it or not, 4 megabytes of expansion space on it, which takes a bit of filling, really, even given the vast multitude of Spectrum software available. But what we could do is put that in the expansion slot like that, so that's ready to go. But then you get to the question of, well, how do I actually get anything on here? Because you know, the only way to get this working is via something like this, and that's where the serial socket comes in handy. And what I've got here is a serial connector going off to a laptop, you know, normal Windows laptop that we'll look at in a minute. But this is the serial lead that goes to there and enables programming of the ROM here before we then use that on the Spectrum itself. Just a quick shout out on this cable. The interface 1 serial port that we've got here is a non-standard design, so therefore you need a non-standard cable to go with it, which is what this is. So just bear in mind, you cannot plug in just a regular PC serial cable in there and expect it to work. But I think the next step is to look at the PC and see how we can program this up. Well, here I am now on my Windows laptop. By the way, this is quite an old laptop that still had a COM port on it, which made connecting up serial quite straightforward. I imagine, but I haven't actually tested it, I imagine the same process would work if you had a USB to serial adapter. If you've only got laptops that or computers that don't have serial ports anymore, I think you will probably need to turn on the hardware handshaking facility on that adapter though to get it to work properly, but otherwise I think you ought to be okay. But in this case I've got a COM port, so things are a little bit more straightforward, and the software we're looking at now is the ZX ROM cartridge creator that enables me to assemble a compilation of different Spectrum programs and put them on my cartridge. So up in the top left hand corner I've got the computer is the Spectrum and my cartridge is the ZX C4. And here are some details about that. It's got 4 megabytes of memory and my free space, because a little bit of it is taken up with program code, so I've got 4000K left, which is more than enough for my use. And all you do is click on the add button here and navigate to where your snapshots are held. I think the easiest thing to do is just highlight all of those and open them, and you can see they add up in the program data file here, and my free space is reduced accordingly, and here they all are in the sort of file view. I think the other thing I would just call out here is that if you're careful about how you choose your snapshots, it is possible to for the software to recognize 16K snapshot files. They have to be, by the way, they can't be SNA files, because I think they can only be 48K or 128K in size. You have to have a Z80 extension to recognize 16K files. The reason I'm going on about that is because I do still have, amazingly, a 16K Spectrum somewhere. So if I set this up accordingly, I won't be able to play the bigger games, but I will be able to play the smaller ones on that machine, which is, you know, that's kind of convenient and a bit of fun every now and again. But we are now ready to go. I can save this compilation, by the way, so it's got this list of files for the future. But the thing I need to do next is hit the send button. But I think at this point, let's just switch over and have a look at the Spectrum screen. So here it is sitting there waiting for me in the ZXC4 programmer menu and asking me to send it a compilation. And what you can see is that there are a number of ways to program it. The one that's interesting to me because of my setup is programming from the interface 1 serial connection, or the interface 1 provided by the Spectra interface. That's my option, but if I had a 128K toast rack, I think it has to be, then I've got two other options, which is the built-in RS-232 port, or even the keypad. If I wire up accordingly, I can connect up to that and actually send the programs through there, or even from cassette, although I'm not sure I've got the patience for all of that. So let me hit enter on that top option, and there we are. We're waiting for the first block through the interface, and on the laptop I'm just going to hit send, and there we go. So each block you'll see is loading and then is programming the flash ROM. Pretty familiar kind of stuff. So we'll just let that go through. It takes a bit of time simply because the Spectrum is only so fast, so can only operate the serial interface at a particular speed. I don't think there is really any way to get around that. While it's doing all of this, of course, there are other ways to effectively load programs from a PC straight onto a Spectrum. I think I showed in one of my previous videos the Div MMC, which I think is a spectacular piece of kit, and that way you could just put things on an SD card or some other kind of more modern drive and load them straight into your Spectrum. Yeah, great, love it. This is just a different way of doing it. I think the other thing I would call out, and we'll see this in a minute when we get on to looking at the Chroma 81, is that this same process can be used for recording files onto a ROM cartridge for a ZX81, where I don't think, I mean, again, if you know otherwise, put it in the comments section, but I don't think it's possible to load stuff very easily straight off an SD card. I think the other thing I would say is, just while we're waiting for this to go through, that these ROM cartridges are all compatible with the Interface 2 and clones of the Interface 2, so you won't be able to program in quite the same way. You would need an Interface 1 or a Spectrum 128, as we saw from the menu options earlier, to actually program on that, but you don't necessarily need the Spectra Plus to go through this kind of process. So maybe you've already got the kit available to you. Alright, so that has all gone through. Let's just take a quick look at that. So there we go. So this is how it would appear at startup. I've got my list of programs there. By the way, in case of any of you are thinking about this, I do have originals of all of these programs before I get any questions about that. But what should we play now? Let's Dynamite Dan, why not? So let's go into that, and we're straight into Dynamite Dan. And as you can see, one of the options here is a Kempston joystick. I don't actually have that plugged in on the Spectrum at the moment, so I can't show you that. But I think that gives you a sense of the immediacy. What I am going to do is just hit the non-maskable interrupt button, so just a sort of system reset kind of thing, and then I can get straight into the next game. What about The Hobbit, an old classic there. And here we are, being Bilbo Baggins all over again. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what the Spectra 128, Spectra Plus 128 is capable of. I think it's a pretty neat bit of kit, offering something a little bit different to Spectrum users. But I've talked about it already. Perhaps now though is the time to turn to the Chroma 81. What can that do? Here's the Chroma 81 interface again, and doesn't it look similar to the Spectra Plus? Let's just have a quick walk around. So we've got the expansion connector, the configuration switches, we've got our ROM port there, SCART output, again RGB SCART, a pass-through bus at the end, connector, our non-maskable interrupt button, serial connector, this time as a standard serial connector, so different cable required for this than for the Spectra one. This is a straight through cable, just like a normal PC one. And our joystick port, not quite a Kempston joystick, but still provides these, I think, fairly standard joystick interface for the ZX81. As I say, looking very similar to the Spectra Plus. In fact, if I put them side by side, there's just a couple of minor differences. First of all, it's the width of the expansion connector, and I know the perspective here is exaggerating it, but the Spectrum's connector is wider than the ZX81 connector, so there's no chance of plugging this Spectra into the ZX81, but you might try and do it the other way around, which probably will end in tears. I just think it's really helpful for Paul Farrow to have put the names of the interfaces here so that I can't plug the wrong interface into the wrong computer. I do have my moments sometimes, and that is really helpful to stop me making a boo-boo. The other thing I would just say is about the moulding of the 3D print here. You see the Chroma one actually is angled in here as opposed to the Spectrum one that's straight, angled in to match the profiling of the ZX81 case. I think that's a really neat feature. Probably a little bit unnecessary, but might just prevent the old RAM pack wobble issues that we used to have back in the day. But very clever, neat design that. Anyway, enough of that. It's the same story with the Chroma 81 as with the Spectrum. We can just plug that in the back of the ZX81, if I can do it without really being able to see what I'm doing. Yeah, are we there? Yeah, we're there. And as you see, that does sort of match the profiling, and then the SCART connector can go in at the back. Like that. And we're a bit easier here on power because the ZX81 power is over here, not at the back, so I can plug that in. But let's just get up at the main screen first. Just before I plug in the power, I need to plug in the serial cable, so let me just do that. And it helps if I get it the right way around. Okay, so that's that in place. And the other thing I need to do, of course, is put in the ROM cartridge. This time it is a ZXC3, so the earlier version, and that's simply because that's one I happen to have a spare one of from times past. So let us just start this up. Okay, so there you can see this is the equivalent programmer utility for the ZX81, and the option is slightly different, but I've got program from Chroma RS232 as the first option, so that's what I'm going to be selecting in a moment. But let's just take a look at the software side of things on the PC. Again, it's the same cartridge creator software, but now I need to flip over to a ZX81 and the ZXC3 cartridge here. So my space on this cartridge is that much lower. It's only 128K of storage space, but that's still what, 8 16K programs. So for a ZX81 that might just be enough. I guess if I had two ZXC4s that would be even better, but I don't. And again, it's the same thing. You can add in the different bits of software as before, like so. So let's hit new line on the ZX81 and hit send on the PC. And you can see the screen going off there while it is doing the loading. I think that is because it's going into fast mode, so trying to keep the transmission rate as high as possible, and while it does that it loses the video display, or at least interferes with it, and the OSSC isn't liking it, or maybe the monitor isn't liking it particularly much, but it is going through. So we are almost there, I think. Block 7 of 7. And I think the other thing, of course, it's doing is programming the flash ROM after it's loaded each block. So that was another reason for it going blanking the screen. So back to the ZX81. ROM programmed successfully. That's always the kind of message we like to see. To run the installed application, press any key. So let's give that a go. And here we are. So here are the programs. I like the sound of Mazogs. Is it Mazogs? That's what I always used to call it when I was a kid, but maybe it's Mazogs now I'm a bit older and wiser. Don't know. Tell me in the comments if you know how to pronounce it. And here we are into the classic game. WADX, yeah, excellent, or WA, right, okay, I've got it. Thank you very much for reminding me what the keys are. Let's go right. ZX81 not the fastest computer in the West, is it? But you know, here we are, back to classic gaming the way it used to be. Oh, let's go and defeat that thing there, the Mazog, or whatever it's called. Oh, another one. Right, I don't have a sword for that. Anyway, enough of that fun. Now, we're all in black and white here, aren't we? And you might be wondering why the interface is called the Chroma 81 if everything's still black and white. But that is one of the other features that the Chroma interface brings to the ZX81, is the ability to extend the graphics capabilities of the ZX81, and there are a number of different ways that it can do that. Two different colour options. One is effectively to add something very similar to the Spectrum's colour display, and the other one is to build on the text style graphics that the ZX81 supports, not high-res graphics but text graphics, by colouring each text character with predetermined colours. And I think from the way that works, those colours are set for that particular game. They don't change in game, and Mazog's, for instance, every X here would be the same colour, and the dots here would be the same colour amongst themselves, but could be different to the other colours for the X's, etc. And that provides a little bit of colour to the game. Let's check that out. Just before we go back to programming the cartridge again, here's a quick thing to show you. So every time you start up the ZX81, this is what you'll be presented with, because that's what's on the ROM. And if I just hit the non-maskable interrupt button, that just resets it all, and I'm back to where I started. So how on earth do I break out of this loop? Well, there's two things you can do. So on the keyboard, if I hold down the shift button while I'm hitting the restart button, I end up back in basic, so it's as though the ROM cartridge isn't there. The second thing I can do is hold down shift 1, which is edit, while I restart, and that takes me into the programmer screen. So now I can start all over again. Quite a neat little feature, that. Just before we look at the programming for colour applications, just another couple of little things that the Chroma 81 does is add 16K extra memory to it, because you saw I was playing Mazog's on there quite comfortably without a RAM pack. The other thing it does is support for the Quicksilver character board, at least emulating that, which requires a further 16K of RAM. So it actually adds 32K of RAM into the ZX81, that some of which is usable for Quicksilver character generator, some of it for colour displays. But how do we get colour display working? Because that wasn't part of the programs we were just looking at. So back on the PC here, let's start with 3D Monster Maze. I just loaded in the .p file here into the compilation and programmed that into the cartridge. But what I can do is come down here to the colour section, click on the little 3 dots and load a .col file and associate that with 3D Monster Maze, and you notice that the name is now in red because there's a colour file associated with it. Let's do the same for Mazog's and Jetpack, or Jetpack 81 more accurately. So you need a col file for each of them to get them working, but if I do that and send, and then on the ZX81 side just program, and off we go again. So back to the same approach, and we'll see what difference this makes in a minute, just when it's finished programming up. This isn't the full sort of attribute style approach to colour that the interface is capable of, the sort of spectrum style colour, but this is colourising each of the characters in the display, and you need the separate col file to do that. So we are getting towards the end, and hopefully the screen flashing will stop fairly soon, because it's probably not very good for you. And we are on to the final block. And programming that final block. ROM programmed successfully. Okay, let's restart. And we're into our usual screen. let's go back to Mazogs again and start it. Now, this time when I start it, I've got a little option here. Press C to colorize the program, so, or anything else for black and white. So let's press C and just look at the difference. And here we are, we're into the colorization. I've got to say that makes it look very different to me and a lot more engaging, just colorizing the different characters on the screen. And some of them, I'm sure you can see the lettering here, actually are dual colors. So you've got yellow and red for the characters, and mixture of bright and non-bright colors here with the checkerboard characters. So something Spectrum couldn't do, at least not very easily, without some pretty specialist programming. So let's just give this a go. Yeah, okay. But you know, not every program has the colorizing information for it, so I have chosen them fairly carefully here. But I think this makes a lot of difference to me. We don't have sound on the ZX81, but the colorization, wow, does feel rather different. Alright, so that's what that looks like. Just very briefly, let's have a quick look at 3D Monster Maze in colour. Yeah, there is someone here. And I might skip through this just for sanity's sake. Here we are then. So why on earth you would put all the keys right next to each other, I don't know, but I'm going to run away. Rex has seen you. Right, let's get out of here, but not down there. Run away. What does Rex look like? Let's let him catch me. There you go. Retro all over again with added colour. One last thing to show you before we round up. We talked about colour there for the ZX81. What I should have said is that the Spectra Plus 128 does also add some additional colour modes to the Spectrum. I've not fully explored those, I must confess, but they do provide extra colour abilities. So it's not just the ZX81 that gets to benefit from new graphics modes. But just moving on, one thing I've loaded in here at the end of my cartridge is Starfight. The reason I've done that is because the Chroma 81 also adds WRX support, in other words real high-res graphics support to the ZX81. So this was something accomplished which requires certain hardware modifications or hardware abilities from RAM expansions to actually work, and in effect fools the character graphics generation on the ZX81 into thinking that it's showing graphics characters on the screen, but actually it's outputting a bitmap in simple terms. So the end result is really quite different, and instantly you can see there it's black and white, not colour, but I've already got some recognisable sprites, you might call them. So let me give this a go and see if I can not get my fingers in a twist, and suddenly we've got something looking really rather un-ZX81 like, and I'm regretting the fact I haven't plugged in a joystick here. but this is looking like a proper game. And apart from the fact that I keep dying, so different, isn't it? And actually feeling quite speedy. Again, it doesn't always feel the most natural thing on a ZX81, is sort of feeling of speed and urgency. Anyway, that brings us to an end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it and hearing about the different capabilities of the Spectra Plus 128 and the Chroma 81, which certainly adds something a bit different, I would say, to both computers. That brings us to an end. Don't forget to click subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.